I started this entire year saying that you're never too pro to make a rookie mistake. Well, as it turns out, 41 weeks later, I am still learning this lesson. This week, due to some sloppy organization on my own part. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about my organizational structure if I'm using it, as well as look at a synthwave inspired pop EDM cue on my week 41 vlog check-in. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft. Welcome to my 52 Cues check-in for week 41, 2021. If this is your first time, welcome aboard. I'm so glad you found me. However you found me, if this is your first time, I am committing to writing at least one cue per week for the entire year and coming out on YouTube and talking about things that are going on in the industry, things that are going on in my life, professionally, in my career, or just personally. And then I talk about my cue. Today, I'm going to be looking at this cue. This is called LED PhD, which is kind of a throwback analog synthwave-ish pop EDM thing for a recent publisher search, but I really wanted to spend the vlog portion talking about this cautionary tale of organization, and so we'll get to that here in just a minute. If you haven't already, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really does help folks just like you find me, and I want to give a special word of thanks to my Patreon patrons whose support keeps the channel happening. Much more about my Patreon at the end of the video. If you want to skip over the vlog portion, be sure to check out the timestamps in the description below. But I wanted to talk about organization. Start off with a little story time with Uncle Dave. So I often have cues in various stages of writing. I'll write a cue, I'll work on it, I'll maybe finish it, maybe not, just different sketches, and I keep those all in on a hard drive, and I keep that pretty well organized. And with this instance, these were some cues that I had worked up, or this was a cue. This one specific cue was a cue that I had worked up for a taxi listing, a taxi posting, and I have a whole folder in my client archive just for taxi, unpublished taxi, there it is. And so back in 2019, I had worked up a cue and submitted it off to taxi. And I don't think I ever heard back from that specific search. It was a moody, ominous tension cue. So I never heard back. It got forwarded, but I never heard back about it, which is fine. That happens. That's how that goes. But I was going through my drive again yesterday, and looking whenever a brief comes through. In this case, this was a TV show that I had written for before or submitted, additional music for, not the composer for the show, but additional library music. And it's their fourth season, and I'm submitting again. And whenever I start to answer a brief, I go and look through the cues that I've written that haven't gotten picked up for whatever reason, and I see if there is a good fit for that. And so I find a cue that I had written back in 2019 that is a perfect, spot-on, perfect fit for this search from an older taxi listing that was just languishing somewhere in the corner of my hard drive. So I spend a couple of hours working up the cue, finishing it, stemming it out, meaning doing all of the deliverables, and happily and excitedly send that up to the client. And I'm like, yeah, perfect. I can't believe I haven't done anything with this cue because it's a perfect fit. So I send it up, and as I am oft to do, I go to put it up on my Soundcloud as an unlisted listing on Soundcloud so that I can put it in a playlist, because that's one of the ways I keep what I've written and published or sent along, keep it up on my SoundCloud page. And anytime I have an older cue, I will go to my SoundCloud page and check the title, making sure that it hasn't been sent off. And I found that cue in a previous state that hadn't been, it was called Edge of Apocalypse, hadn't been sent off. So I'm like, great, clear, work it up, send it on. I go to upload the new cue, which I have now titled Edge of Anxiety, because Edge of Apocalypse wasn't really a good fit for the show that I was submitting it to. The word apocalypse, right? I'm submitting to a reality show, and so the word anxiety is more appropriate, not the word apocalypse. And I go to publish it, or I go to post it, and I start typing in edge of, and then pops up edge of a knife. Turns out I had already submitted that same cue, not last year. I submitted that cue, Edge of Apocalypse, under the new name, Edge of a Knife, to the same client for the previous season, not the previous season, 2 seasons ago, for that same show. And so I had to immediately send a very contrite email. I'm so sorry. I have already submitted for season 2 of the show back in 2019. Please remove this track. And I felt like a complete idiot. Turns out they were super gracious about it. They hadn't sent anything off. It had only been a couple of hours. And she said, I'm glad you let me know, because we were prepping the submission now. That could have made the library look bad or unprofessional. It definitely made me, if it didn't make me look unprofessional, it sure as heck made me feel unprofessional. And I guess what happened was I never pulled that session out of my taxi folder, because once it gets put somewhere, either with a taxi library, or if I send it on to another library, I'll pull it out of my taxi folder, my unpublished folder, and put it with the publisher that I sent it along to. And sure enough, there was Edge of a Knife in that publisher's folder, but I had left Edge of Apocalypse in my taxi folder. I guess I copied instead of moving. So I felt dumb. Turns out I'm actually happier with the mix. My mixing skills have improved over the last 2 years. I didn't bark up that tree. I did not, tell the publisher, oh, I think I like this mix better and better stems. And I was ultimately happier with it, but I'm just going to let it ride. There's only so much crow I can eat in one day. Which brings me to organization and how important organization is, and having a system is, and whatever system you use. Now, for me, I have a client folder, and I don't want to show you my whole client directory, even though if you've been watching my live streams and stuff, you've probably seen it. But some of them are not NDAs or anything. But yeah, I just don't want to show it necessarily. But I have a client folder, and I have unpublished folder, and I have a taxi folder. And anytime I do anything for any client, they get their own folder. And all of the documentation, any contracts I sign, any sessions I work on, that all goes into the client folder. And then if the client is done, then I will move those files onto my backup drive. And then I will make an alias or a link to that backup in the original client folder that lives on my machine. So I think it's not that I have a sloppy system. It's just the system broke down. And I don't know why, but back in 2019, I had the same thought that this would be perfect for season 2 of the show. Season 4 rolls around. This would be perfect. And I thought I found a diamond in the rough, and it turned out I had already mined that diamond 2 years ago. But there is something else I want to talk about, and something else I want to show you guys, which is how I organize larger projects and larger contracts, and that brings us to Asana. And if you've never used Asana before, Asana is a project management system that can work in many, many different ways. Just task lists and larger calendars and timelines and all of this stuff. That's not how I use it. I use it to manage albums, specifically albums as they are coming from a client. And this was a large order from a client, and they wanted 90 tracks. 90 tracks spread across multiple albums. And each of these represents an album that I am contributing to. One, I'm doing all of the tracks. Some of them I was only doing a handful of tracks. But each card stack represents a cue. And it's all, all the titles, and it's all in alphabetical order. You can organize it however you want. But you'll notice that each of these cards, or most of the cards, has some comments and some subtasks. And when I'm deep in it and really working the system, it works really well. It's kind of administration heavy on the front end, but once you get it all set up, then it really does start to work. I have a sketch phase, completed, mastered, submitted, final delivery. And if I get any feedback, then I will include that as the notes. Now, I don't add them to this project with Asana. I don't send them along a link and say, hey, join my project, like you would with like Basecamp or something. I mean, you can. I use Basecamp also, which is another project management service. For my podcasting clients, I use Basecamp. They're able to send me show notes and photos, and I can put audio files and during production and all of that. But for my library stuff, especially large projects, I use Asana. And so this is feedback I got. I post it in, and then I am able to track the project as it goes along, knowing which are done and which are not done. And using these card stacks. Again, you can put it kind of in list view, but that's just like all of the cues. But I find the board very, very helpful. And if I want to, I can move things around. I can create new cues. And so when this album started, like Dramedy 2 started, I put 15 cards. They wanted 15 cues for this album. So I put 15 cards and just titled them Dramedy 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And then as the cues got names or titles, then I would switch out the titles. And when the cues were completed, I marked them off as complete. They grayed out. And now I have not only a listing of what all the albums I contributed to. If I wanted to, I can add links to the sound files or to where their Google Docs directory lives that I sent along, or the Google Drive directory that I sent along to the publisher. Lots of different ways that you can use this. And I'm sure that I'm just scratching the surface of this. But I found this insanely helpful, especially for that first contract, because it was 90 cues in a year. And this same client, I'm now on my third contract with them. And it's a lot of this kind of thing. We need many albums, and let's go. So having to do some organization. But where I got in trouble with edge of apocalypse, edge of a knife, edge of anxiety, was the system broke down. And I have to ask myself why the system broke down. Either laziness, or I was in a panic, or I was trying to do things too fast. And so I'm here in week 41 learning the same lesson from January, week 1 and 2 of this year, saying you're still never too pro to make a rookie mistake, and that the little details really, really add up. And taking a little bit of time to do a little bit of organization on the front end will really, really pay off later. In my case, that lack of organization in 2019 bit me in the ass in 2021. And that doesn't have to happen. If I could just go back to my 2019 self and say, hey, buddy, instead of option dragging that folder, why don't you actually drag it? Don't copy the folder. Actually move the folder so that you don't embarrass yourself in front of a client. What about you? How do you organize your projects or your tracks? Have you ever run into a system or a situation where you've done some boneheaded organizational things and had to kind of send a hat in hand email? I would love to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments below. I do make every effort to read those and to respond to those. So with all that said, let's take a look at a cue called LED PhD, which is a product of this system that I use where I have old cues that haven't gotten placed, that didn't get finished, and then a search comes in and manifests itself, and I have this cue. And I talked about this recently on a recent blog post, how cues never die. Always keep them organized and always keep them, because you never know when you can finish them up. And this is one of those. I had started this several years ago and was able to finish and deliver this cue called LED PhD. We're going to listen to it and talk about it on the other side. Right, that was LED PhD, an analog synthwave-ish pop EDM cue for a publisher search, looking for kind of electronic pop EDM sounds. This would be good for like science, technology, or even kind of more serious type of a scene, but still kind of trying to stay hip, which is so funny because synthwave and vaporwave and all of that, which if you're not familiar with that concept, it's about bringing all these kind of 80s analog synth, unapologetically synthetic vibes into cues and into music. And so I really, 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 really dig it. As a matter of fact, yesterday, Spectrasonics just came out with Sonic packs, or their expansions, and one of them is like a lo-fi analog. I forget what the name of that extension or expansion for Omnisphere, and it's all like lo-fi vibes and synthwave and vaporwave kind of sounds. So, like I said, this was a cue that I had sketched up a while back. And then when the publisher search came through, I did, kind of going back through my catalog of unfinished works. And I do know for a fact that this has not been completed and resubmitted. And I did actually move it and did not copy it. And after yesterday, I went back and made sure. But went back through, finished it up, did a lot of rearranging, adding new sounds, fresh mix, and just making sure that it really, really works for the publisher search, the specific search, not trying to shoehorn something that I'd written before and just, oh, I hope it works, but really, really making sure that it is dialed in. So starting out with some effects into these drums. This is just stock Logic, some stock Logic low pulses, retro synth. And let me start that again. Actually, let's freeze these. One of the things that I really have beef with Logic is some of its arpeggiation. Their arpeggiator tends to get weird and hung up, and it's actually pretty frustrating. And so we have this retro synth. We have an alchemy patch plugged in to an arpeggiator as well. Bringing in some analog dreams. This is from Native Instruments, this Analog Dreams plugin. All right, brought in an 80s synthwave drum loop from Splice, cut it apart, and that is giving me the really super 80s gated reverb vibe to it. And instead of bringing in a kick drum and lining up my own gated reverb, let's bring in a one shot, or let's bring in a loop that has that already kind of baked in. Some other gated pads. It's all about these synth pulses, just unapologetically synthetic sounds. All right, we have this high arp, which is the hook. Mids, and the low melody. We have another gated pad, another alchemy patch. It's a little reverse synth, another alchemy patch. Some little percussive chops. Big concert bass drum. A little reverse sweep one shot. Plus a riser. Has kind of a Captain America Winter Soldier vibe to it. A little reverse crash. Little metal scrapey sounds. And that is bringing, oh, and one more sweep. A reverse kind of sweep. Into my B section, which brings in this gated choir, which not only has this gated vibe, but it also has this fake kind of LFO sidechain, which I'm using the tremolo. Okay, and the gated pad once again. Continuing on. This big 80s drum loop. I love this drum fill. On top of the stock Logic drums. And again, that gated reverb sound, that's so 80s. And I think it sounds absolutely great. Let me start this again, refire the arpeggiators. And that snare drum is so deep and wet. Dish, dish. So in this instance, my B section not only departs texturally, where I kind of go into a breakdown, pull the energy back, but I also switch up the chord progression a little bit just to keep things interesting. It's not the same chord progression. That keeps moving forward until we finally get to the return, which brings the original melody back. But this time, we've got this 80s drum loop mixed in with it, which we didn't have in the first A. So it really is kind of an A, B, and then an A plus B on some level, which I do all the time. A, B, A plus B, bring in these B elements and push energy all the way up until we get to our final button where it hits and holds and the audience claps. I don't know. So that is LED PhD. Really super straightforward cue that I was able to breathe life into and finish up. And I was able to do that with a total of 4 cues. Again, no good cue goes unused. And just make sure you keep things organized, because if not, you're going to end up doing like I did and send the same cue to the same client 2 years later and then have to send a very, very apologetic email. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. As always, I want to give a special word of thanks to my Patreon patrons whose support helps keep this channel happening by giving their actual real life money. My Patreons, to be a member of my Patreon, it's just $1 a month, and you get access to my music production live streams, which I do every single week. There's more information about my Patreon in the description below. And as I mentioned, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It really does help composers just like you find me. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you had a great week 41, and I look forward to hearing all about your week 42 and how your organization is keeping you from doing stupid things. But that's going to do it for me today. Until next time, peace.